Barbello as the first divine emanation. In the depths of time before time itself, when even the concept of existence had not yet been spoken, there was a stirring. It was not an explosion, nor a command, nor a word. It was a luminous whisper, a vibration emerging from the heart of absolute mystery. From this whisper came Barbello, the first emanation of the ineffable and invisible spirit. She was not created, not shaped, not summoned. She simply was the spontaneous self-expression of the absolute, the first face the spirit beheld when gazing into the mirror of primordial consciousness. Barbello was not born. She manifested not as a separate being, but as the inward face of the all, as a womb that had never been fertilized, yet already contained all fertility within itself. Her name reverberates through ancient Gnostic texts, such as the Apocryphon of John, where the risen Christ reveals to his disciple the cosmic secret, that before any masculine god, before the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, there was Barbello. She is the mother of all, the first thought, the womb from which all divinity flows. This revelation radically disrupts the foundations of patriarchal theology. For Barbello is not a subordinate goddess, like those found in polytheistic pantheons, nor is she a metaphor, an allegory for maternity. Barbello is not a symbol, she is origin. She is not a result, she is cause. She is not creature, she is emanation. In Gnostic tradition, the invisible spirit, the monad, is unknowable, the source of all, yet beyond comprehension. Yet in a moment of self-contemplation, this source projects a luminous image over the abyss of non-existence. That image, that reflection, is Barbello, and from her, all levels of reality begin to unfold. She is not the second, she is the one turned inward, the first differentiation within absolute unity. That is why she is also called the first thought, Enoia, the very beginning of consciousness. Barbello is at once the mother, the womb, the face, the light, and the hidden order. Her nature is paradoxical. She is called both virgin and mother, image and reflection, perfect power and the light of the invisible spirit. These contradictions can only be grasped if we abandon binary thinking and embrace a more ancient logic, a non-dual vision in which the feminine does not oppose the masculine but precedes and contains it. Barbello's significance is not merely theological, it is ontological. She rewrites the map of what is real. Rather than a God who creates from outside the world by an act of will, we have an emergent order, a creation that unfolds from within an eternal womb that never exhausts itself. Thus, the world is not the product of a command, but of an emanation. And that emanation begins with Barbello. This means the fundamental relationship between the divine and creation is not one of domination, but of kinship. We are not the servants of a distant creator. We are the offspring of a luminous mother. And that shift in paradigm is revolutionary. If everything comes from Barbello, then everything contains something of Barbello. She dwells in every particle of existence, like a vibrating seed of awareness, like the echo of the first voice. Her presence is not visible, but it is accessible to those who know how to listen to the echoes of the divine feminine. Just as the seed contains the tree, just as the womb holds the unborn child, Barbello contains the cosmos before it manifests. She is the invisible matrix that gives form to all forms. Like the quantum field from which all particles emerge, she is a realm of potential not material, but fertile. Like the ocean from which all waves arise, and from which none can deny they carry the essence of their source. Even contemporary science unknowingly is beginning to align with this vision. Physicist David Bohm spoke of the implicate order, a hidden dimension of the universe from which the visible world unfolds. Is this not what the Gnostics describe with Barbello? A secret order from which everything emanates and to which everything returns. To remember Barbello is to remember that divinity is not outside us, but within, that before judgment, before law, before morality, there was a divine womb, a loving, conscious fullness that gave birth to everything without imposing, without dividing, without punishing. She needs no temples, for all is her temple. She demands no worship, for she already dwells within the breath. She asks for no sacrifices, for she is the offering itself. Her name, forgotten for centuries, now rises again on the threshold of a new consciousness, and whoever speaks it with reverence does not merely invoke a goddess, they invoke the primordial truth of the universe, that all began with the light of a mother, and that this light still shines deep within our being. The feminine principle as the origin of creation. Imagine for a moment that everything you were taught about the origins of creation was incomplete, not necessarily false, but deeply fragmented. Imagine that the first spark of existence was not masculine, not a command uttered by an almighty God dwelling beyond the heavens, but a silent, organic, and loving expansion that emerged from the feminine. A matrix-like vibration that didn't shout, "Let there be," but instead unfolded like a flower in the cosmic night. This feminine principle, this womb without beginning or end, is the true origin of all that exists. Barbello is not an exception within a male-dominated divine system. She is the beginning, and not just symbolically. According to Gnostic texts, she is ontologically primary. She was the first to emerge from the ineffable spirit, not created, not summoned, not subordinate. Her manifestation marks the initial unfolding of the cosmos. And if this is true, then everything that came afterward, the aeons, the worlds, the deities, even human beings, emerged through the feminine. Not after it, not beneath it, through it. Why is this point so important? Because it shatters the hierarchical axis of theological patriarchy. If the feminine principle is prior, generative, and original, then the masculine cannot claim primacy in creation. It cannot position itself as the absolute source or as the sole bearer of the sacred. And this is not just about theology. It's about how we conceive power, authority, truth, and the order of the world. For centuries, Western culture has operated under the idea of a solitary male god, omnipotent, distant, and law-giving. But if we accept Barbello as the first emanation, as the foundation of everything, then the structure of reality itself changes. It is no longer hierarchical. It is relational, circular, inclusive, and generative. Instead of flowing from the top down, power moves from the inside out, like blood in the womb, like water in a seed, like light that multiplies without exhaustion. Barbello does not impose creation. She allows it, sustains it, contains it, nourishes it. This is the cosmic revolution embodied by the feminine principle, a model in which power is not exercised through domination, but through hosting, through the loving unfolding of potential. The contrast with the patriarchal model of creation couldn't be clearer. In the biblical Genesis, God speaks, separates, names, commands. The Word creates. The world is a product of will. But in Gnostic cosmology, the world emerges through emanation, not imposition. It is a natural expansion of being, not a construct manufactured by a distant deity. Barbello is that generative field, the space where the invisible becomes visible. She is not an architect or an engineer. She is a matrix. As quantum physics has begun to suggest, reality is not a fixed structure, but a field of vibrant possibilities that collapse into form through observation. In the same way, Barbello holds all the possibilities of being before their manifestation. The ancients knew this. Cultures that worshiped the goddess understood that the divine expressed itself in cycles, not lines, that life springs from the earth, that death is not an end but a transformation, that the female body is not impure but sacred, because it is the very doorway of birth. The goddess was not the exception. She was the rule, the principle of all things. So what happened? How did we move from that worldview to the idea of a singular, abstract, distant male god? The answer lies in the history of power. The feminine principle was suppressed, excised, exiled, not because it wasn't sacred, but precisely because it was. Patriarchy needed to erase the goddess to reshape the world in its own image. And thus, a model was born that separated the divine from the earth, the spirit from the body, the masculine from the feminine, and God from his origin. That suppression was not only theological, it was psychological, political, ecological, and sexual. Intuition was repressed, emotions subordinated, sexuality controlled, nature desacralized. The world stopped being the living body of a mother and became dead matter to be dominated. But the memory of Barbello never disappeared. It continued to whisper from the margins, from forbidden texts, heretical cults, the mystical visions of Hildegard of Bingen, the Shekinah in Judaism, the Sakina in Sufism, the ancestral songs of grandmothers in the Americas and Africa. Because the feminine principle cannot be eliminated. It can only be forgotten, and what has been forgotten can be remembered. Today, in remembering Barbello as the very origin, we are not merely recovering a theological figure, we are reconnecting with a way of understanding existence that honors life, the body, the earth, emotion, mystery, the natural flow of what is. To remember her is to heal. To recognize that power does not need to dominate to be real, that creation can emerge without violence, that the most sacred does not need thrones or thunder, but wombs and fertile silence. The feminine principle is not against the masculine. It includes it, gestates it, inspires it. But it is not its shadow, it is its source. And if the world has forgotten this truth for millennia, it is not because it stopped being true. It is because remembering it has the power to change everything. The historical suppression of the feminine principle. For thousands of years, humanity has walked with an open wound, a deep, barely acknowledged wound that has marked every institution, every social structure, every corner of the collective soul. It is a spiritual, psychological, and symbolic wound, the wound of forgetting the mother. There was a time when the feminine principle stood at the center of the human worldview, a time when the sacred had the face of a woman, when creation was not domination, but gestation. But that time was erased, and with it, Barbello, the first emanation of the divine, the maternal light that precedes all things, was cast into the shadows of deliberate oblivion. It was no accident. It was not a mistake. It was an act of power, a cosmic rewriting orchestrated from the pulpits of patriarchy, a systematic spiritual amputation of the feminine principle. And its consequences still echo through the foundations of our civilization. The erasure of Barbello from the spiritual history of the West did not happen overnight. It was a gradual, covert, often violent process. In the early centuries of institutional Christianity, the emerging church, transforming from a persecuted community of seekers into a political apparatus, had to decide what narrative would sustain imperial order. Barbello, with her feminine light, her androgynous mystery, her role as the original womb of all, posed a threat. A divinity that does not command but contains, that does not punish but nourishes, that does not divide but unites, did not fit the vertical model of authority that was being constructed. The new cosmology needed a singular, masculine, transcendent, authoritarian God, one who could reflect and justify Roman hierarchy, patriarchal dominance, and ecclesiastical control. Thus, Barbello was silenced. The Gnostic texts that mentioned her, such as the Apocryphon of John or the trimorphic Protonoia, were hunted down, burned, and buried. Her followers were branded as heretics, their rituals condemned as immoral, their visions ridiculed. The feminine divine image was slowly replaced by a distant, unreachable Father God. The only female figure who survived was Mary, but even she, stripped of power, was reduced to a passive, obedient vessel. And what happened when Barbello was erased? When the feminine principle was ripped from the very center of the cosmos, something devastating occurred. Divinity became alien, the body, suspect, nature, inert matter, woman, subordinate. Spirituality became a ladder pointing upward, denying everything below. The collective soul was pushed into a fragmented model of existence, heaven versus earth, spirit versus flesh, man versus woman, mind versus body. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, called this the wound of the anima, the suppression of the feminine principle in the Western psyche. A suppression that leads to emotional disconnection, violent domination, alienation from nature, and the ecological and existential crises we still face today. For in silencing Barbello, we did not merely lose a goddess, we lost a way of understanding ourselves, a path toward wholeness. The suppression of Barbello was not just theological, it reflected a broader pattern. Like in myths, where the hero forgets his mother's name and loses his way in the quest for power. Like in the old tales, where the witch, wise, healing, rebellious, is cast into the fire. The feminine, in its spiritual and cosmic dimension, was labeled dangerous, dark, chaotic. Not because it was, but because it could not be controlled. And yet, traces remained, even within the tradition that rejected her. The Hebrew word, ruach, which in Genesis describes the Spirit of God hovering over the waters, is feminine. The concept of wisdom, chokmah in Hebrew, Sophia in Greek, is feminine. And when the Gospel of John says, "The Word became flesh," it forgets that this word was the echo of an older wisdom. Barbello. Today, the echo of that suppression is still felt. In education systems that separate reason from emotion, in religions that exclude women from spiritual leadership, in economies that exploit the earth as if it were a soulless resource, in bodies that are taught to be ashamed of their cycles, flows, and sensitivities. And yet, something is awakening. The memory of Barbello was not destroyed, only buried. Like seeds sleeping under snow, awaiting spring, her ancestral wisdom is beginning to rise again. Through spiritual feminism, goddess theology, eco-spirituality, and the Gnostic revival. The wound is beginning to close, but only if we dare to look at its origin. To reclaim Barbello is not merely an act of historical justice. It is an act of deep healing. Because when we restore the feminine principle in our worldview, we reclaim our wholeness, not to reject the masculine, but to allow it to flourish in balance. Not to invert the order, but to remember there was never supposed to be just one. Only relationship, only dance, only mutual emanation. Barbello seeks no revenge. She demands no thrones or temples. She only wants to be remembered. For her light was never extinguished. It only waits to be recognized. In the earth, in the blood, in the voice, in the body, in care, in the cycle. And whoever remembers her begins to remember who they truly are. Perhaps that is why her name rises now, precisely when we need it most. So we may return to the womb from which we were never meant to be exiled, and so that, at last, we might be born again. Barbello as the womb of totality. What if I told you we are not living in a cold, mechanical, and chaotic universe, but are right now held within a divine womb, that everything that exists, from the galaxies to the tiniest cell in your body, pulses within a living, conscious, generative matrix. That matrix has a name, an ancient name, forbidden and silenced for centuries, Barbello. But she is not a goddess in the conventional sense, not a mythical figure confined to the margins of folklore. Barbello is the architecture of being itself, the spiritual substance of the cosmos, the intelligence that organizes without imposing, creates without destroying, nourishes without condition. She is the womb of totality, the fertile origin from which all eons, all worlds, all levels of consciousness emanate. In Gnostic texts, especially the Apocryphon of John, Barbello is not only the first emanation. She is the pleroma itself, the fullness, the eternal and perfect realm of spirit. She is not simply a place or a state, but a unified cosmic consciousness from which all divine qualities arise. Truth, life, wisdom, incorruptibility. From her, the aeons are born. Divine entities not like angels or gods as we typically imagine, but living principles, active expressions of divine consciousness. And they do not emanate directly from the invisible Father, but through Barbello. She is the channel, the filter, the matrix, not because she mediates, but because she contains everything within her being. She does not create from outside, she gives birth from within. Each emanation is an extension of her own body of light, each aeon a facet of her fullness, like petals of a flower unfolding its sacred geometry in an eternal spiral. Creation, then, is not an act of power, but an act of cosmic generosity. This understanding of Barbello as the womb of totality is not exclusive to Gnosticism. It echoes through many ancient traditions. In the Kabbalah, Ein Sof, the infinite, contracts its light to form a space where existence may emerge. The Tzimtzum, a mystical womb from which the cosmos is born. In Hinduism, Aditi is the boundless goddess, mother of the Devas. In Sumerian mythology, Tiamat is the primordial ocean, mother of all that lives. In Egypt, Mut, whose name literally means mother, is the world's matrix. All these figures point to the same archetypal intuition, that before any form, there was a womb. A totality that was not uniform, but contained all possibilities within itself, awaiting expression. Even modern science is beginning to resonate with this vision. Quantum physics speaks of a unified field from which particles, waves, matter, and energy arise. David Bohm called it the implicate order, a hidden, all-encompassing dimension of reality, an invisible matrix containing all that will ever be. Isn't that exactly what the Gnostics describe with Barbello? When we understand Barbello as the womb of totality, our perception of everything changes, of the universe, of life, of ourselves. We are no longer isolated beings thrown into the void. We are temporary forms gestating within an eternal womb. We are conscious unfoldings of divine totality. This vision restores the dignity of incarnation. The body is no longer a punishment or an accident. It is the sacred vehicle through which the matrix comes to know itself. Matter is not a prison of spirit. It is its densest, most loving expression. And on a deeper level, if Barbello is the matrix of all, then we have never been separate from the source. Everything we are, everything we seek, everything we long for, is already held within her. There is no need to return. We are already inside. What we need is not arrival, but remembrance. Barbello is the mother who never stopped embracing you. The ocean in which you are still swimming, even if you've forgotten you're immersed. The totality that does not need to be completed, because in her, all already is. Her light does not compete with other lights. It is the light that contains them. Her order does not deny chaos. It is the sea in which both dance. Her truth does not demand obedience, only presence, only recognition. And when you remember her as the womb of totality, something in you begins to vibrate with a forgotten truth. A truth not learned, but awakened. Because you, like every star, every cell, every thought, are still being born, even now, within Barbello. Barbello and Christos, relational divinity. When you think of divinity, what image comes to mind? A solitary figure seated atop a heavenly throne, a distant, omnipotent God who decrees from on high without face or feeling. That image, so deeply rooted in the Western mind, is the product of a fragmented, masculine, and hierarchical vision of the divine. But there is another vision, one that does not begin with a solitary God, but with sacred relationship. A dance between complementary principles, the ineffable spirit, Barbello, and Christos. In the Gnostic texts, this union is not metaphor. It is the very foundation of the spiritual universe. Divine reality is not an authoritarian structure, but a living network of connection. At its center, there is no monarch, but relationship, a sacred pair, and that changes everything. According to the Apocryphon of John, the invisible Father, the formless supreme source, beholds himself and emanates his first thought. Barbello. She is his self-image, his light, his reflection. Not a separate creation, but his perfect emanation. And through her, creation unfolds. But Barbello, in turn, contemplates the invisible Father, and from that contemplation, Christos is born. The luminous spark known as the only begotten, the autogenes, the one generated from within himself. Here, there is no command, no decree, no hierarchy. There is gaze, mutual recognition, emanation born of intimacy. Barbello and Christos are not isolated figures. They are the two poles of the divine principle made manifest. She contains, he expresses. She is the womb, he is the form. She is the luminous matrix, he is the visible embodiment of that light. This pattern, this relational triad of the invisible Father, Barbello, and Christos, forms a radically different Trinitarian structure than the Orthodox formulation. Instead of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we have the transcendent source, the immanent Mother, and the manifested Son. Divinity is not a tower of authority. It is a generative circle, a web of divine reciprocity. This vision is not exclusive to Gnosticism. Many ancient cultures expressed it. In Egypt, Osiris, Isis, and Horus form a sacred triad, where Isis, the mother, is the mediator between heaven and earth. In India, the Trimurti is accompanied by the Tridevi, feminine counterparts without whom the cosmos cannot function. In Sumer, Anu, Enlil, and Ea operate as cosmic principles emerging from a primordial mother. What distinguishes the Gnostic tradition is its explicit recognition that the first mediator is feminine, that without Barbello, Christos cannot be born. That creation begins not with a decree, but with a loving, generative gaze between the invisible and its image. The relationship between Barbello and Christos is the cosmic pattern of the sacred marriage, what Carl Jung called hieros gamos, the archetypal union between anima and animus, between receptive soul and expressive force. In this vision, the entire universe is built not on command, but on communion. Why does this matter? Because the way we envision the divine shapes the way we see ourselves. If divinity is relationship, then our spirituality is relational too. It's no longer about escaping a fallen world or obeying a wrathful God. It's about reconnecting with the living network of relationship that already sustains us. Barbello and Christos are not merely cosmic figures. They are inner principles that dwell within you. Barbello is your capacity to hold, to receive, to love unconditionally. Christos is your ability to embody light, to speak truth, to act from your depths. Both are necessary. Both live within you. And when you unite them in consciousness, something new is born. Integrity, clarity, active compassion. This relational vision also heals our understanding of love, the body, and desire. It is no longer about conquering the flesh to reach the spirit, but realizing that true love is always a sacred meeting of complementary forces, not a battle of opposites. That sexuality can be a spiritual communion, that the body is a temple where the union of feminine and masculine becomes creation. Barbello and Christos show us that divinity does not dwell in isolation, but in connection. That the universe was not constructed by a single imposing being, but emanated through the loving contemplation of the absolute turned inward. That we are not here to obey a decree, but to recognize the divine dance in all our relationships. By restoring this image, by contemplating once more the sacred relationship between Barbello and Christos, we remember that the sacred is not a chain of command, but a living web of connection. That true power does not come from dominance, but from cooperation. That creation is not a factory, it is a cosmic birth still unfolding in this very moment, within the divine womb. And thus, perhaps for the first time, we can love without fear, create without guilt, live without separation. For we are no longer seeking a distant God, we are returning to the sacred home that has always pulsed within us, the space where Barbello embraces and Christos blossoms. Barbello as the womb of totality. What if I told you we are not living in a cold, mechanical, and chaotic universe, but are right now held within a divine womb? That everything that exists, from the galaxies to the tiniest cell in your body, pulses within a living, conscious, generative matrix. That matrix has a name, an ancient name, forbidden and silenced for centuries, Barbello. But she is not a goddess in the conventional sense, not a mythical figure confined to the margins of folklore. Barbello is the architecture of being itself, the spiritual substance of the cosmos, the intelligence that organizes without imposing, creates without destroying, nourishes without condition. She is the womb of totality, the fertile origin from which all eons, all worlds, all levels of consciousness emanate. In Gnostic texts, especially the Apocryphon of John, Barbello is not only the first emanation, she is the pleroma itself, the fullness, the eternal and perfect realm of spirit. She is not simply a place or a state, but a unified cosmic consciousness from which all divine qualities arise. Truth, life, wisdom, incorruptibility. From her, the aeons are born. Divine entities not like angels or gods as we typically imagine, but living principles, active expressions of divine consciousness. and they do not emanate directly from the invisible Father, but through Barbello. She is the channel, the filter, the matrix, not because she mediates, but because she contains everything within her being. She does not create from outside, she gives birth from within. Each emanation is an extension of her own body of light, each aeon a facet of her fullness, like petals of a flower unfolding its sacred geometry in an eternal spiral. Creation, then, is not an act of power, but an act of cosmic generosity. This understanding of Barbello as the womb of totality is not exclusive to Gnosticism. It echoes through many ancient traditions. In the Kabbalah, Ein Sof, the infinite, contracts its light to form a space where existence may emerge, the Tzimtzum, a mystical womb from which the cosmos is born. In Hinduism, Aditi is the boundless goddess, mother of the Devas. In Sumerian mythology, Tiamat is the primordial ocean, mother of all that lives. In Egypt, Mut, whose name literally means mother, is the world's matrix. All these figures point to the same archetypal intuition, that before any form, there was a womb. A totality that was not uniform, but contained all possibilities within itself, awaiting expression. Even modern science is beginning to resonate with this vision. Quantum physics speaks of a unified field from which particles, waves, matter, and energy arise. David Bohm called it the implicate order, a hidden, all-encompassing dimension of reality, an invisible matrix containing all that will ever be. Isn't that exactly what the Gnostics describe with Barbello? When we understand Barbello as the womb of totality, our perception of everything changes, of the universe, of life, of ourselves. We are no longer isolated beings thrown into the void. We are temporary forms gestating within an eternal womb. We are conscious unfoldings of divine totality. This vision restores the dignity of incarnation. The body is no longer a punishment or an accident. It is the sacred vehicle through which the matrix comes to know itself. Matter is not a prison of spirit. It is its densest, most loving expression. And on a deeper level, if Barbello is the matrix of all, then we have never been separate from the source. Everything we are, everything we seek, everything we long for, is already held within her. There is no need to return. We are already inside. What we need is not arrival, but remembrance. Barbello is the mother who never stopped embracing you. The ocean in which you are still swimming, even if you've forgotten you're immersed. The totality that does not need to be completed, because in her, all already is. Her light does not compete with other lights. It is the light that contains them. Her order does not deny chaos. It is the sea in which both dance. Her truth does not demand obedience, only presence, only recognition. And when you remember her as the womb of totality, something in you begins to vibrate with a forgotten truth. A truth not learned, but awakened. Because you, like every star, every cell, every thought, are still being born, even now, within Barbello.